In a distant future, humanity had finally achieved what many thought was impossible: contact with alien civilizations. The first encounter came after years of waiting, decades of sending out signals, and endless research into the mysteries of the universe. No one was sure what to expect, but when the moment finally arrived, it was peaceful. The aliens were not hostile. They did not come with weapons or threats, but with curiosity. Just like humanity had always imagined, the aliens, known as the Valorians, were a tall, slender species with blue skin that shimmered like the sky at twilight. Their eyes were large and dark, almost black, and their voices had a soft, melodic quality. They were peaceful beings who believed in harmony and cooperation. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever seen, and they offered to share it. Earth's governments, overwhelmed by the possibilities, agreed to send diplomats and scientists to meet with the Valorian delegation. Among the human representatives was Dr. Emma Calloway, a historian who had dedicated her life to studying ancient human history. Emma was excited about the opportunity to meet the aliens, but she also felt a deep unease. She had always suspected that Earth's history held secrets, things that had been lost or hidden over time. As the first meeting began, Emma tried to stay focused on the task at hand. She had to represent humanity not just as a historian, but as someone who understood the weight of what was happening. She knew that the way this first encounter went would shape the future of Earth and its place in the galaxy. At first, everything went well. The Valorian delegation was kind and respectful, offering humanity a chance to learn from their advanced technology. They shared knowledge of medicine, energy, and space travel. The Valorian ships were massive, capable of traveling faster than light, and their technology seemed almost magical. The humans were in awe, but Emma could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too easy, too perfect. She began to wonder if humanity had been too quick to trust the VA. Single quotes: Laurie's days turned into weeks, and the peaceful exchange continued. Then, one day, something happened that none of them had expected. The Valorian scientists, working with Earth's best researchers, made a discovery that would change everything. They found something in the genetic code of humans, something that should not have been there. It was a set of patterns in human DNA that pointed to a deliberate design, something that had been engineered by an ancient civilization long before humanity had even evolved into the species it was today. At first, the discovery was dismissed. It seemed too outlandish to be true. But as the Valorian scientists dug deeper, the evidence became undeniable. The patterns in the human DNA were too precise, too intentional to be the result of natural evolution. The Valorians, being a highly advanced species, had a deep understanding of genetics. They began to realize that humanity was not the product of natural selection, but rather the creation of a long-lost race known as the Primus. The Primus were an ancient species who had lived thousands of years before humanity had even begun to walk the Earth. According to the Valorian researchers, the Primus were masters of genetic engineering. They had the ability to manipulate life itself, creating species that were suited for specific tasks. And it seemed that humanity had been one of their creations, a species designed for war. When the Valorian leaders learned the truth, they were shocked. They had always thought of humanity as a young, innocent species, capable of learning and growing. But now they realized that humanity's potential for destruction was not accidental. It was in their very DNA. The Valorians began to question everything they had believed about Earth. They had offered humanity the chance to join the greater galactic community. But now, they were unsure if that was wise. Could they really trust a species that had been created for war? Emma was one of the first humans to learn about this discovery. She had always been a curious and driven person, and when she was approached by the Valorian scientists, she couldn't believe what they were telling her. At first, she thought it was some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding. But the more she learned, the more she realized that it was true. The evidence was irrefutable. The humans had been engineered to be the perfect soldiers. Their bodies were built to adapt to combat, to survive in hostile environments, and to evolve quickly in response to threats. The Primus had designed humanity to be the ultimate weapon, capable of fighting and conquering anything that stood in its way. Emma was horrified by the implications of this discovery. If humanity's true purpose was to be a war machine, what did that mean for their future? Would they be able to resist the urge to conquer and destroy when they were given the tools to do so? Or would they become the very threat that the Valorians feared? As the news of the discovery spread through the Valorian government, panic began to set in. The peaceful Valorian society had always prided itself on its neutrality and its commitment to nonviolence. They had never imagined that a species like humanity could exist, one with the potential to destroy everything in its path. They began to question whether they should share their advanced technology with humanity after all. If humans were truly engineered for war, then perhaps it was better to leave them to their own devices and prevent them from gaining the means to cause widespread destruction. Emma felt torn. She had always believed in the potential of humanity to do good. She had studied the history of Earth, and despite its flaws, she knew that humanity had the capacity for kindness, compassion, and growth. But now she wondered if that potential was being overshadowed by a darker side that had been built into their very nature. As the Valorian Council debated what to do, Emma found herself in a difficult position. She had to make a choice. Should she warn humanity of what was coming, or should she keep the secret and let the situation play out on its own? She didn't know what the right answer was. All she knew was that the peaceful future that had once seemed possible was now uncertain, and humanity's place in the galaxy was hanging in the balance. Dr. Emma Calloway sat quietly in the dimly lit room, her mind racing. The news she had just learned was still sinking in. Humanity, the species she had spent her life studying, was not what it seemed. They weren't just a race of people with a history of struggle and survival. They were something else entirely. They were created, engineered for war. The Valorian scientists had shown her the evidence. The patterns in human DNA were unmistakable. There was no denying it. Someone had designed humans to be the perfect soldiers, and the discovery had sent shockwaves through the entire Valorian Council. Emma had always believed that humanity was capable of greatness. She had seen the good in people throughout her career as a historian. Sure, there had been wars, mistakes, and dark chapters in history, but she had always thought that humanity could rise above its flaws. Now, she wasn't so sure. If humans had been created for war, if violence and conflict were in their very nature, could they ever truly change? Could they resist the urge to fight once they had the power to do so? The Valorian scientists had worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, and they had done it. They had discovered that the humans had been genetically modified by a long-lost race called the Primus. The Primus had created humanity to be a weapon, a species designed for battle. The evidence was clear. The genetic modifications were too precise, too specific to be the result of natural evolution. Humans had been made to survive war, to thrive in the chaos of conflict. Their bodies were built to adapt quickly to combat situations, to heal faster, to become stronger. They were perfect killing machines. Emma had heard about the Primus before. They were an ancient civilization, long extinct, but their technology had influenced countless other species. The Valorians had always respected the Primus for their advanced knowledge and scientific achievements. But now, Emma realized, the Primus had not been peaceful creators. They had been warlords, and they had shaped humanity in their image. Emma thought about her own life. She had spent so many years studying the history of humanity, trying to understand how people had evolved, why they had made the choices they did. She had never suspected that the story she had dedicated her career to could be a lie. Humanity had been shaped by something darker than she could have ever imagined. But what did this mean for the future? Could humanity truly change? Or were they doomed to repeat the same patterns of destruction? And what about the Valorians? They had welcomed humanity with open arms, eager to share their knowledge and technology. Now, they were beginning to fear that humanity's true nature was too dangerous to be trusted. Could the Valorians, with all their wisdom, risk sharing their advanced technology with a species that had been designed to fight? Emma knew she had to make a choice. She could warn humanity about what she had learned. She could tell them the truth and hope that they would understand the danger they faced. But would they believe her? Would they listen? Or would they simply see her as someone trying to cause panic? Someone who was paranoid about the future? The Valorian leaders had been clear. They were not sure what to do. On one hand, they didn't want to destroy humanity. They had hoped that the humans could join the galactic community, that they could work together to create a better future for everyone. But on the other hand, they could not ignore the fact that humanity was a race created for war. If they gave humanity the technology to travel the stars, what would stop them from using that power to conquer other civilizations? Emma had spent hours talking to the Valorian scientists, trying to understand what they thought humanity should do. Some of them were in favor of keeping humanity in the dark, hiding the truth and keeping them from accessing any advanced technology. Others, however, believed that humanity deserved a chance to prove that they could be more than just soldiers. They believed that humans had the potential to rise above their violent nature, to create something better. But Emma wasn't sure. Could humanity really change? Could they ever shake off the violence that had been built into their DNA? And if they did, what would it take to undo the damage? In the days that followed, Emma continued to meet with the Valorian scientists. They had shared everything they knew about the Primus and their genetic experiments. They had explained how the Primus had altered the DNA of the early human ancestors, making them more adaptable, more resilient, but they had also made them more prone to violence. The changes they had made were not just physical. The Primus had altered the very essence of humanity, shaping their minds, their instincts, to be soldiers. Emma's mind raced as she tried to process everything. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how deeply humanity's violent nature was embedded in their genes. How could they fight something that was so ingrained in their very being? How could they resist the urge to fight, to conquer, to destroy, once they had the power to do so? One night, Emma found herself staring at a map of the galaxy, the stars twinkling in the dark expanse of space. She thought about the Valorians and the other species they had encountered. The Valorians had been peaceful for centuries, yet they had learned the hard way that not all species shared their ideals. Emma had seen firsthand how quickly things could go wrong. She had witnessed the darkness in humanity's past. She had seen the devastation caused by war, by hatred, by fear. Could humanity really change? Emma knew that the Valorians had no easy answers. They were divided. Some of them wanted to help humanity, to guide them toward a peaceful future. Others, however, were more cautious. They feared what humanity might become if they were given the tools to expand their reach across the galaxy. The fear was real. The fear was justified. Humanity, with its violent history and its engineered nature, might be too dangerous to trust. As Emma sat in her room, staring out into the stars, she realized that the choice she faced was not an easy one. She could tell humanity the truth and hope they would understand. Or she could remain silent and let the future unfold on its own. But whatever choice she made, the future would never be the same. Emma felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her as the days passed. The Valorian Council was in turmoil. They had learned the truth about humanity, and now the galaxy was in a state of uncertainty. The peaceful alliance that had seemed so promising was now hanging by a thread. The discovery of humanity's true origins had sent shockwaves through the Valorian leaders. Some of them wanted to protect humanity, to help them change and grow, while others feared the consequences of giving them the technology and knowledge that the Valorians had accumulated over centuries. Emma had been called into several meetings with the Valorian leaders. They were still undecided about what to do. Some argued that humanity, despite its violent nature, had the potential to rise above its instincts and join the galactic community. Others, however, believed that the risk was too great. Humanity had been engineered for war, and there was no guarantee that they wouldn't use the advanced technology of the Valorians to conquer other civilizations. Colonel Jack Moore, a high-ranking officer in the human military, had been outspoken in his belief that humanity needed to be prepared for the worst. He was one of the few who truly understood the implications of the discovery. Jack had spent years studying military strategy and the history of conflict. He knew what humanity was capable of, and he was not convinced that they could change their nature. He believed that humanity was on the brink of becoming a galactic threat, It was only a matter of time before they would have the power to do so. Jack had always been a pragmatist. He had seen the dark side of humanity firsthand, and he wasn't willing to take any chances. He knew that the Valorians were powerful, but he also knew that they weren't invincible. If humanity gained access to their technology, the balance of power in the galaxy could shift. Jack believed that the only way to ensure humanity's survival was to take control of the situation before anyone else could. The tension between the Valorian Council and the human governments grew with each passing day. Some leaders on Earth, especially those with military backgrounds, saw this as an opportunity to gain power. They believed that if they could secure the Valorian technology, they could create a new human empire that would dominate the stars. They argued that humanity had the right to take what they wanted and shape their own destiny. They saw themselves as the heirs to the legacy of the Primus, and they were ready to claim their place as rulers of the galaxy. But not everyone on Earth shared that vision. Emma had been speaking to a growing group of diplomats, scientists, and peacekeepers who believed that humanity could still choose a different path. They didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. They wanted to prove that humanity could be more than just soldiers. They wanted to find a way to live in peace with the galaxy's other inhabitants. As the debates raged on, Emma found herself caught in the middle. She had spent her life studying history, and she knew how easily things could spiral out of control. The more she thought about the situation, the more she realized how fragile the peace was. If humanity's leaders didn't come together soon, the galaxy could be plunged into a war that no one was prepared for. Meanwhile, Jack Moore was working tirelessly behind the scenes. He had already begun making plans to secure the advanced technology the Valorian S had shared. He had the support of powerful military leaders on Earth. They were willing to do whatever it took to ensure that humanity was ready for what lay ahead. Jack knew that time was running out. The Valorians were already questioning whether they should share any more of their technology with Earth. And if the humans didn't act quickly, they might lose their chance. Jack met with a small group of human generals and military leaders to discuss their next steps. They knew that the Valorians had powerful weapons, ships, and energy sources, and they were determined to get their hands on them. Jack's plan was simple: infiltrate Valorian research stations, steal the technology, and return to Earth with the means to defend humanity against any potential threat. The Valorian S had shown humanity their power, but Jack believed that the Valorian S were weak in certain areas. If they could exploit those weaknesses, humanity would have the upper hand. Jack was aware that his actions could have serious consequences, but he wasn't willing to wait for the Valorians to make up their minds. He was determined to ensure humanity's survival, even if it meant going against the peaceful ideals of the Valorian S. Emma, however, was horrified by Jack's plan. She knew that this was the path that would lead humanity down a dark road. If Jack and the military leaders went through with it, there would be no turning back. Emma had spent too much time studying the past to ignore the dangers of repeating history. She had seen what happened when nations and civilizations became too focused on power and control. It always ended in disaster. Humanity could not afford to make the same mistakes again. Emma knew that she had to act quickly. She couldn't just sit back and watch as the situation escalated. She reached out to her contacts within the Valorian scientific community, hoping to find a way to stop the human military from taking action. She began to work with them on a plan to reverse the genetic changes that had been made to humanity. If they could remove the warlike traits embedded in human DNA, perhaps humanity could be given a chance to prove that they could be more than just soldiers. But it was a risky plan. Emma knew that time was running out. The more Emma worked with the Valorian S, the more she realized how deep the problem went. The genetic modifications made by the Primus were not easy to undo. The changes had been woven into every part of humanity's biology. It would take years, if not centuries, to reverse them completely. The process was dangerous, and it could have unintended consequences. But Emma was determined to try. If she could convince the Valorian S to help humanity change, maybe there was still hope for a peaceful future. As the situation grew more tense, Emma found herself torn between two opposing forces. On one side was Jack Moore, the military pragmatist who believed that humanity's future lay in domination. On the other side were the peacekeepers, scientists, and diplomats who believed that humanity could still choose a different path. Emma was caught in the middle, unsure of which side to take. But one thing was clear: the future of humanity and the galaxy itself was at stake. Emma had to make a choice. She had to decide whether to follow Jack and the military leaders, or to fight for a future where humanity could prove that it was more than just the sum of its violent past. She knew that whatever decision she made would have consequences that would shape the future of the galaxy forever. Emma sat at her desk, staring at the star maps spread out before her. The weight of the situation was heavier than ever. Time was running out, and decisions were being made without her. She had tried to speak up, tried to warn those around her, but it seemed that every path she took only led to more uncertainty. The military was moving forward with its plans, and Jack Moore was at the center of it all. His vision for humanity was clear, and he was determined to see it through. But Emma knew that if Jack's plan succeeded, there might be no going back. The galaxy could be plunged into chaos, and humanity would be forever branded as a dangerous species. The situation had escalated faster than she could have imagined. The Valorian Council had been divided from the beginning, with some leaders wanting to give humanity a chance, while others were fearful of what they might become. The fear was real. The discovery that humanity had been engineered for war was not something easily ignored. Even the most peaceful races in the galaxy were starting to question whether they could trust humanity. And Emma could see that the Valorians, despite their advanced technology and wisdom, were just as uncertain as everyone else. For days, the situation had seemed to spiral out of control. The Valorians had stopped sharing their technology with humanity, and many of the leaders were considering withdrawing completely from the alliance. The humans were starting to feel betrayed, angry at the Valorians for holding back. Emma had heard whispers of military factions within the human government pushing for action, demanding that humanity take what it needed, even if it meant using force. The peaceful diplomacy she had once believed in seemed like a distant dream. Jack Moore's influence had only grown. He had already begun gathering allies within the military, and his plan to seize Valorian technology was now in motion. He knew that humanity's future depended on them being able to defend themselves and control their own destiny. He believed that if the Valorians wouldn't share their knowledge, humanity would have to take it. Jack was convinced that the only way for humanity to survive in the galaxy was to become strong, to assert their dominance, and to ensure that no one would ever look down on them again. Emma's heart sank as she thought about what might happen if Jack's plan succeeded. The peaceful humans who had tried to reach out to the stars, the ones who believed in cooperation and unity, would be overshadowed by the forces of war. The galaxy would see humanity not as a partner, but as a threat, a species with the power to destroy. And once the first blow was struck, there would be no way to stop the conflict from spreading. But Emma wasn't ready to give up yet. She couldn't just stand by and let Jack's vision of humanity's future take shape without at least trying to change it. She had spent too long studying the history of humanity to believe that there was no hope for them. There had to be a way to prevent the war that seemed inevitable. She had to find a solution. In secret, Emma had continued working with the Valorian scientists. They were the only ones who truly understood the depth of the problem. The genetic modifications that had been made to humanity were deeply embedded in their biology, and reversing them would take time, effort, and a great deal of patience. But Emma believed it could be done. If they could somehow undo the warlike tendencies that had been built into humanity's DNA, perhaps the violent urges that had been embedded by the Primus could be silenced. It would be a long-term solution. But it was the only hope she could see. Emma knew that the military wouldn't wait for that kind of solution. They wouldn't care about long-term change. They would take what they wanted, and they would do it quickly. The situation was growing more dangerous by the day, and Emma felt that she was running out of time. If she couldn't stop the military's plans, the galaxy would be on the edge of war, and humanity would be at the center of it. One night, Emma met with Jack Moore. She had to try to convince him to stop, to see that there was another way. She found him in a quiet room, overlooking the city below. The tension in the air was thick, and Emma could sense the weight of the decisions that were about to be made. "Jack," she said softly. This isn't the way. We don't have to go down this path. We can still find another way. Jack turned to face her, his expression hard and resolute. Emma, you don't understand. The Valorians won't help us. They're afraid of us. And they have every right to be. Humanity was designed for war, and if we don't take control of our own future, we'll be left behind. The galaxy will never accept us if we don't show them our strength. But at what cost, Jack? Emma's voice trembled with emotion. Do you really think humanity will survive if we start a war? We've fought wars before, and they've only brought destruction. Do you want us to repeat that cycle again, but this time on a galactic scale? Jack's eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in them. I know it won't be easy, Emma, but we don't have a choice. If we don't act now, we'll be wiped out. The galaxy won't tolerate us. We'll be nothing more than pawns in someone else's game. Emma shook her head. We're not pawns, Jack, we're humans. We have the ability to change, to grow. We can't let the past dictate our future. There's a way out of this, but we have to work together. Jack's expression softened for a moment, and Emma saw a glimpse of the man she had known before the war had taken hold of him. What are you asking me to do, Emma? He said quietly. I'm asking you to stop, she said. I'm asking you to trust me. We can still fix this, but we need time. We need to work with the Valorian S, not against them. If we rush into this, we'll lose everything, Masha. Jack was silent for a long moment, and Emma could see the conflict in his eyes. He was torn between his belief that humanity needed to assert its strength and the realization that war might not be the answer. Emma knew that this was the moment that could change everything, but she also knew that the decision was out of her hands. If Jack refused, the galaxy would be on the brink of war, and humanity's future would depend on whether they could survive the conflict. Emma wasn't ready to give up yet, but she knew that the next few days would be critical. The days following Emma's meeting with Jack felt like they were slipping through her fingers. She had tried to reach him to convince him that there was another way, but Jack's determination was like a wall. He believed in his vision for humanity's future, and nothing Emma said seemed to make a difference. She had seen that look in his eyes before, the one that meant he was set on his path, no matter the cost. But still, she couldn't give up. Not yet. Humanity was on the brink of something dangerous, and Emma could feel it in every part of her. If Jack and the military leaders went through with their plan, it would be pushing humanity toward a future that was filled with war, fear, and endless conflict. The galaxy would see them as a threat, and that's how they would be remembered. It wasn't the future Emma had imagined for her species. The Valorian S, too, were at a crossroads. They had shared their knowledge and their technology with humanity, but now they were pulling back. They were afraid, and who could blame them? They had learned the truth about humanity's origins, and the fear was real. The Valorian S had always been a peaceful species, but they knew that if humanity got their hands on their advanced technology, they might not be able to control the destruction that would follow. Emma had spent so many hours talking to the Valorian scientists, trying to find a way to reverse the genetic changes that had been made to humanity. She had thought that maybe there was hope, that if they could undo the warlike tendencies that had been embedded in human DNA, humanity could be saved. But as the days passed, the truth became clearer. The process was far more complicated than she had imagined. Undoing what the Primus had done would take time, maybe even centuries. And the military wasn't willing to wait. They didn't have that kind of time. The human governments were growing impatient. They saw the Valorians pulling away, and they saw the military factions pushing forward with their plans. There were whispers of war, of humanity taking what it needed by force. Emma had tried to speak out, to warn them about the dangers of that path. But her voice seemed small compared to the growing noise of those who believed that strength was the only way forward. Jack Moore was one of the loudest voices, and he had the backing of the military leaders who believed that humanity could only survive if they became the strongest. Force in the galaxy, Emma could only watch as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The military was moving forward with their plan, and soon there would be no turning back. The Valorians had warned them, but humanity had refused to listen. Now, there was only one choice left: fight or be destroyed. It all came to a head when the Valorian S decided to leave Earth behind. They had shared everything they could, but they had reached their limit. They were too afraid of what humanity might become. They saw the potential for destruction. And they knew that if humanity gained access to their technology, the galaxy would be in danger. They could no longer trust the humans. The alliance, which had once seemed so promising, was crumbling. Emma was heartbroken. She had spent so much time fighting for peace, for understanding, and now it felt like it was all slipping away. She had tried to convince Jack, tried to stop him from pushing humanity down a path of war, but now it seemed like there was no choice left. The galaxy was about to see humanity for what it really was, a species created for conflict, a species destined to destroy or be destroyed. The military had already begun their preparations. Jack had gathered his allies, and the first moves were being made. Emma knew what was coming. The Valorians were leaving, and humanity was about to face the consequences of their actions. Emma didn't know if there was any way to stop it now. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and humanity's place in it would be decided by the choices made in the coming days. But then, something unexpected happened. The Valorian-S, who had already started to pull back, came to Earth one last time. They didn't come with weapons or threats, but with an offer. The Valorian leaders had been talking among themselves, and they realized something. They had been too quick to judge humanity. Yes, humanity had been engineered for war, but that didn't mean they were doomed to follow that path. The Valorians had seen potential in humanity, potential for greatness. They had decided that they were willing to give humanity one more chance. It was a risk. The Valorians knew that. But they also understood something important. The future of the galaxy wasn't just about strength. It was about growth, about the ability to learn from mistakes and to change. The Valorians had done that in their own history, and they believed that humanity could do the same. They offered humanity a chance to prove that they could rise above their violent past and become something more. They were offering the tools to undo the genetic changes, to remove the warlike tendencies. But only if humanity was willing to put in the work. Emma was stunned by the offer. She had not expected this. She had spent so much time believing that the future was already decided, that the path of war was inevitable. But now there was hope. The Valorians were willing to help, to guide humanity toward a new future. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick. It would take time, effort, and a willingness to change. But for the first time in a long time, Emma felt a glimmer of hope. Jack was not easily convinced. He had spent so long preparing for war, for the inevitable conflict that he believed was coming. He wasn't sure if he could trust the Valorian-S, but as he listened to their words, he began to see something different. Maybe they were right. Maybe humanity didn't have to be defined by its past. Maybe they could change. The decision was still in the air, but for the first time there was a sense of possibility. The future was not yet written. Humanity still had a chance to choose its path. The galaxy was watching, and the choices made now would shape the future for generations to come. Emma knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that humanity had the potential to be something more than it had been. They could choose peace. They could choose growth. They could choose to be better. And so, as the stars shimmered above, Emma held on to that hope. The journey was just beginning, and humanity had a chance to prove that they were more than just the sum of their past.